Recording. So let's discuss when we talk about the Iranian threats, there's a number of different threats. Let's start off with their Iranian nuclear threat. So since before the 1979 revolution, Iran was developing a nuclear energy program. When the Iranian supreme leader came to power, and the Ayatollah and his henchmen came to power in 1979, and began to look around at, okay, what did we inherit? What did we take over? When they realized they had the beginnings of a nuclear energy program, they quickly realized that that could be easily transferred into a nuclear weapons program. The way a nuclear weapon is made, if I can just on one foot give a layman's explanation as to how one makes a nuclear weapon, it's really, I mean, yes, it's obviously more difficult, let's say, than making popcorn at home, right? But the instructions of how to make a nuclear weapon are found on the internet. You can find it. What makes it difficult is that you obviously have to have a certain amount of technological know-how of how to run the machines, and you must get the materials for a nuclear weapon. That you can't order. You can order it online. Let me correct myself. You could order uranium to make a nuclear weapon. The only problem is that the police will also visit you along with the delivery, because you're not allowed to possess too much weapons grade uranium or uranium that could be turned into weapons grade. And the same alerts that are sounded if you order that to your house will be sounded much louder if you're a fundamentalist Islamic country that has posed threats to the rest of the world, and you begin to order lots of uranium. That also poses a tremendous problem. So the way it works is you get again a layman's explanation here. You take a mineral called uranium that you bring out from the earth. You mine it from the earth. And this uranium is not pure. It has to be purified to be used for any purpose whatsoever. If you purify the uranium by spinning it in what's called a centrifuge, the mass spinning of it for over a long period of time takes out the impurities, and the uranium becomes more pure. To reuse uranium for energy purposes only needs to be purified at about 5%. It does not require that much purification to be used for nuclear energy. To use for a weapons program needs to be at a much higher level of purification. And in fact, there's no known use, as far as I know, there's no known use of purified uranium at high levels other than for weapons grade material. As the only reason why you purify uranium and keep it spinning in the centrifuges past the point of where it could be used for nuclear energy is in order to create a nuclear weapon. That's how nuclear weapons are made, by purifying then you have to have the technology and the know-how to be able to take it and put it into a warhead, and then the warhead has to be attached to a missile that you can properly aim. You don't want to be sending a nuclear weapon off like Hamas sends rockets off, where it could 90% of them don't hit their target, 50% of them hit where they took off from, and 40% of them have a chance of hitting your enemy. And of those 40%, since it's not guided, it ends up hitting an empty field. You want your nuclear weapons to be able to hit exact, and you want them to be attached ideally to an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM. An ICBM is a missile that's fired into outer space, guided by satellites, and then comes back down to Earth and hits its target. That's ideally what you want to have. So Iran in 1979 had begun the process of trying to achieve this. Now let's keep in mind, the United States of America was the first to acquire a nuclear weapon. And it did so without the use of the computers that we have today. The computer that I'm speaking to you on today that you're using to watch me is 100 times more sophisticated than anything that they had when they developed the nuclear weapon. There was nothing. It was mostly done by paper. Again, very smart people, Einstein's, Oppenheimer's, right? These were the geniuses of the time. But they wrote down how to do it, and those notes have become public. So it's very easy, so to speak, for a country to develop nuclear weapons. Which begs the question of what's taking them so long, right? Why is this taking Iran so long? And the answer is because the world is trying to stop them. But what's the threat? Let's say Iran would get a nuclear weapon. What would be so bad? If Pakistan has nuclear weapons, right? Pakistan is not exactly a country that we would all want to have nuclear weapons. They're bordering India, which also has nuclear weapons, and they hate each other. So you have two countries that hate each other with nuclear weapons facing each other. That doesn't seem like an ideal situation. So if that's not ideal, why not let Iran get a nuclear weapon? Who are we to tell them no? North Korea has nuclear weapons. That's a country nobody trusts with nuclear weapons, right? Probably North Korea themselves don't trust themselves with nuclear weapons. So how is North Korea able to have nuclear weapons and Iran can't? Well, what we're worried about is a couple of things. First of all, most of these countries, maybe North Korea to the exception to the rule, most of these countries have rational actors running them. They don't have religious fanaticism that's developing policy for their countries. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad used to be the president of Iran. He famously said that he understands that if he hits Israel with a nuclear weapon, there will be a retaliation by Israel, and there will most probably be a nuclear strike, in which case probably 40% of the Iranian population would be wiped out by an Israeli counter-nuclear strike to an Iranian nuclear strike against Israel. And he said that he accepts 40% as an acceptable loss if it meant the destruction of the Zionist entity. So you're not dealing with fully, we all remember the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union and the United States had MAD. They had mutually assured destruction. They knew that if one of them tried to destroy the other one, then the other one would also be destroyed. So that made sure that nobody used it. There's no such thing when it comes to Iran. Nobody thinks that Iran works on the same sort of calculations, and it would be a mistake to assume so, that they work on the same sort of calculations that other countries do in terms of their hesitation or willingness to use a nuclear weapon. So the first thing that we have to worry about when it comes to Iran is the fact that they would actually use a nuclear weapon. That's the first issue. Now, let's say they won't use it. Let's say for whatever reason they decide not to use it. Does that mean that we can, if we had some sort of a guarantee that we could take to the bank, so would it now be okay for us? Would it be acceptable to have a nuclear weapon? So the answer is no, because what we'd be worried about is that they would use it as a standalone that you could then have a user for blackmail. What do I mean by that? So Iran has proxies. We're going to discuss them hopefully soon. Iran's proxies are Hamas or Hezbollah. These are terrorist organizations that are spread out throughout the region. So they're not hesitant in firing rockets at Israel. Imagine if Iran would tell their proxies, we would like you to fire rockets at Israel. And they fire a slew of rockets, 30, 40, 100, 200, 1,000 rockets they fire at Israel in one day. And Israel prepares to retaliate. And Iran says, you're about to retaliate against the poor people of Gaza or the poor people of South Lebanon. If you do so, we, Iran, feel that we have to come to the protection of the people that have no protection. We have to stand up for the poor people of Gaza. We have to stand up for the poor people of South Lebanon. And therefore, if you go ahead and retaliate against them, we're going to be forced to use nuclear weapons against you. What would an Israeli prime minister do in that situation? On the one hand, he can't just assume a nuclear blast. He has to take Iran's nuclear threat seriously. On the other hand, if he doesn't retaliate or she doesn't retaliate against a proxy of Iran, then they're just opening themselves up for rocket attacks forever, and without an ability to stop them and without an ability to retaliate to stop it from happening. So those are obviously completely unacceptable. Okay. The third threat that Iran's nuclear weapons program has is that they simply hand it to a proxy. Iran is very good at this. Iran is very good. This is their playbook over and over. They do this in Iraq today on a daily basis. They have proxies in Iraq, and the proxies in Iraq attack either the Iraqi security forces or the American forces there. And Iran is able to say, it wasn't us. It wasn't us. We were not the ones that did this. And that's we obviously recognize the falseness of such a claim, but they're able. Imagine if instead of passing rockets and passing bullets to mortars and ICUs to their proxies, instead they passed a nuclear weapon to Hezbollah, and Hezbollah launched a nuclear weapon at Israel. So then, what would Israel do? On the one hand, it has to retaliate against Hezbollah. On the other hand, it's a very tenuous argument to say that we are able now to use nuclear weapons against Iran when Iran wasn't the one that sent the weapons. When it was Hezbollah that did the nuclear weapon, it was Hezbollah that did so. So that's the third threat. So three threats that we're worried about with Iran developing a nuclear weapon. The first is them using the nuclear weapon themselves. The second is that they blackmail Israel with it. And the third is that they give the weapons over to proxies. Those are three threats that we must take very, very seriously. Okay, stop the